Hiya guys, welcome to the Newcastle United training ground. It's Tuesday morning. I've just been in the last 20 minutes or so speaking to Eddie Howe ahead of tomorrow night's match in the Carabao Cup at home to Manchester City. As you can see, I'm in the indoor hall here, down at the bottom end of the training ground. The last part needing a bit of upgrading since the place has been refurbished over the last couple of years. Hopefully for us guys in the media down here, it will be upgraded soon and we'll have better facilities. But this is where we do a lot of our work right now, at the bottom end of the training ground, right next door to the press room, which is obviously where we meet Eddie Howe before every match. I'm actually here later on today for an interview with Sean Longstaff as well, ahead of tomorrow's match against Manchester City. But what I want to talk about is the big news that has come out of Eddie Howe's news conference this morning, and that is that winger Harvey Barnes has suffered a substantial injury, according to Eddie Howe, and the Newcastle manager is fearing that he faces months rather than weeks on the sidelines. I was there at Bramall Lane on Sunday. It looked pretty innocuous when he was taken off after around 12 minutes. We saw him fall to the ground with nobody near him at the time, and then afterwards I saw Harvey Barnes leave the stadium through the front, walked right past me with one of these protective boots on. At the time we thought it was, just looking out for his injury and making sure that it didn't get any worse. But having spoken to Eddie Howe this morning, listened to what he had to say concerning the injury, it sounds like it's a bad one for Harvey Barnes, and that is a real blow for Howe and Newcastle United, given the fact that Barnes and Gordon were both beginning to look like real options for Newcastle down that left hand side. So what has he said this morning, Eddie Howe? He said, I don't want to put a time scale on it, but we're fearing that it's months rather than weeks. He said he did it when nobody was around him, and we suspect that it's a substantial injury. He said we're waiting on the specialist's opinion. He was scanned yesterday. The specialist will tell us in due course whether Barnes requires surgery or not. He said there was no tackle, there was no one near him, he pushed off to run, and it was then that he felt the pain. He said it was in just underneath the toe area of the foot, so unsure whether that means it's a break or a muscle injury or maybe a tendon injury at that part of the foot. He said it's a very, very unusual injury, Eddie Howe, and he said without getting into the specifics of it, it just sounds as though it's something that's going to keep him out for a significant amount of time. I mean, for Eddie Howe to come out in a news conference and say one of his players is set to be missing for months is a pretty big thing. And I guess the last thing he wanted was one of his attacking players missing, because he wants to rotate the squad against Manchester City tomorrow and then against Burnley at the weekend, and then I would imagine he'll mix it up again and go back to the tried and tested against PSG in the Champions League next week. So Harvey Barnes, I would have imagined, would have probably started against Man City tomorrow or Burnley at the weekend, but that now won't happen due to the fact that this injury appears to be a serious one. What else did he say? He said there was nobody around him at the time. He got a bit of a fright. He's very down about it because he knows himself that it's a serious injury. He says, however, we will be there, of course, to support him fully. He is a top quality player, and he was beginning to show that. Of course, Barnes, remember, scored in his debut at St James's Park against Aston Villa, that great goal in the 5-1 win, and of course he scored a couple in pre-season as well, and he was going to be a real option, I think, moving forward down that left hand side. So let's see. It might be that the specialist looks at it and thinks that it will be weeks rather than months, but just listening to the way Eddie Howe spoke this morning, he's obviously had a little bit of intel from the specialist since the scan, and it looks as though it's something that's going to be a real problem for them. What else did Eddie Howe speak about today? Obviously, reflected on the 8-0 win against Sheffield United at the weekend. He said he hopes they've kept some goals back for Manchester City and Burnley, but definitely feels that it's done the players' confidence no harm at all. Of course, the players were given a down day yesterday, back in for training today ahead of that match against Manchester City tomorrow night, where he said that he does plan to make some changes He didn't go as far to give us any names, who will play, who won't play, but I get the impression that the likes of Tino Livramento, Lewis Hall, Sandro Tonali will come into the team. I would imagine Alexander Isak starts tomorrow. I think Callum Wilson would then start again against Burnley at the weekend, and then Isak would start against PSG, and I think that's kind of the way things may go at this early start of the season, where there's so many fixtures to contend with. So I do think he will make changes. I don't think he'll make wholesale changes. I think the goalkeeper might change. You might see Dubravka or Karius in goals. He'll probably have to play Longstaff or Bruno in midfield, one of the two, due to the fact that Joe Willock and Joe Linton are missing in there, a little bit short in midfield. But I think where he can make changes in the full-back areas, further forward, wide, Gordon may start on the left, but I would also imagine Jacob Murphy will come into the team as well. So, you know, I would imagine sort of 4, 5, 6 changes, but not wholesale changes. And he was asked about Pep Guardiola's comments yesterday when Pep said he will make a lot of changes. He'll play the academy kids. He joked that he might even play himself. Eddie Howe thinks that City will still play a strong team, and he's not, you know, he expects Pep's comments yesterday not to ring true, and he thinks that a lot of his big name players will still play at St James's Park tomorrow night. However, he does see this as an opportunity to knock out the favourite to win the trophy. He said it's the draw that nobody wanted, Manchester City, in the third round. However, if they manage to eliminate them early, it gives Newcastle a real run at it, and we all saw what happened last season as Newcastle got to the final of the Carabao Cup. It just gave them so much good feeling around the city and within the club as a whole. So they know if they carry on, if they have similar this season, it could do that again. Obviously difficult because of the Champions League and the Premier League matches to contend with, but Eddie Howe's not the sort of manager who goes into a game and says, look, I'm happy to chuck this one or leave it. He wants to win every game that they play in. So I expect Newcastle to go at it hammer and tong tomorrow night against Manchester City and try and eliminate the favourites for the competition. Harvey Barnes won't be there. Hopefully we'll get an update on him in the coming days, but bad news from the Newcastle United training ground this morning that Harvey Barnes is set to miss a significant amount of time. Eddie Howe fearing it's months, he said, rather than weeks. Hopefully we'll have an update on that in due course, and I'm around later on today to speak to Sean Longstaff, who of course was a big player in last season's cup run all the way to the final, scoring those 2 goals in the semi-final. So that's it from me here at the Newcastle training ground this morning, where the bad news is, as I say, Harvey Barnes ruled out for a significant amount of time due to that foot injury picked up against Sheffield United on Sunday.